What is this kid doing here? Get him out before he contaminates something. Dr. Leonard Graves's voice cut through the polished marble lobby of St. Augustine Hospital like a whip, snapping the attention of every nurse and patient nearby. All eyes turned to the small figure standing in the doorway. Caleb Rivers, dripping from the freezing rain, worn sneakers squeaking against the floor. He didn't flinch. He didn't even wipe the water from his face. Instead, he looked past the startled crowd and fixed his gaze on the little girl in the wheelchair across the hall. "I can help her walk," he said, his voice calm but filled with conviction. "I know how." Dr. Graves laughed sharply, as though the words were a bad joke. "Street kids don't walk in here and tell me how to treat my patients, especially not Lily Monroe." Caleb stepped forward, ignoring the looming security guard. 3 years and she hasn't taken a single step. But I can change that. Dr. Daniel Monroe, pushing his daughter's chair, froze mid-step. Lily's wide eyes locked on Caleb, and without warning, she reached out both arms toward him. A hush fell over the hall. "Lily, no," her father whispered, trying to wheel her away. But then came a sound no one expected. A single word, clear and soft. "Friend." Graves's jaw tightened. Caleb knelt to meet Lily's eyes. "Hi, Princess. Do you want to learn to dance?" Security closed in, but Caleb looked up at Graves one last time. "I know why she's never gotten better, and so do you. CTA, what would you do if a stranger claimed they could fix what the experts said was impossible?" 3 days passed, but the image of that soaked, determined boy wouldn't leave Dr. Leonard Graves's mind. His words replayed like a splinter under the skin. "I know why she's never gotten better, and so do you." Graves told himself it was nonsense, the delusion of a desperate child. Yet every time he remembered the steadiness in Caleb's eyes, an unease twisted in his gut. Thursday morning was gray and biting cold. As Graves approached St. Augustine Hospital, he noticed a small figure sitting on the stone steps. Caleb Rivers. The boy was hunched against the wind, hands in his pockets, watching the hospital entrance like he belonged there. He made no move to come inside. He just sat, as if waiting for something or someone. "Why hasn't anyone called the police?" Graves snapped at the security guard inside. "He's not causing trouble, doctor. Technically, the sidewalk's public property," the guard replied with a shrug. Graves ground his teeth and stalked off, determined to ignore him. But that morning during Lily Monroe's physical therapy session, something strange happened. Lily, usually passive and distant, kept glancing toward the tall therapy room windows. Her hands twitched against the armrests of her wheelchair. Following her gaze, Graves saw Caleb outside, his breath fogging the glass. Lily began to fidget, her face lighting with an urgency Graves hadn't seen in years. "What's gotten into her today?" Dr. Daniel Monroe asked, noticing the sudden energy in his daughter. "Just a phase," Graves replied curtly, pulling the blinds closed. "We may need to adjust her medication." But Lily whimpered in protest, her eyes brimming with tears. The kind of tears that came from frustration, not pain. That afternoon, Graves found Caleb standing in the parking lot, speaking quietly to Nurse Margaret Hale, one of the most respected veterans in the hospital. "Margaret, you were told not to interact with this child," Graves barked. Margaret flushed, but stood her ground. "Doctor, he was telling me about techniques his grandmother used on special needs children. It's fascinating." "Fascinating?" Graves scoffed. "He's an untrained street kid." Caleb turned to him, calm as ever. "My grandmother was Grace Rivers. She worked here for 30 years in pediatric neurology. Maybe you remember her." Graves's chest tightened. He remembered Grace all too well, her brilliance, her stubborn refusal to give up on any child. She had been a legend. "That's impossible," Graves muttered. "She raised me after my parents died," Caleb said, voice steady. "She taught me everything about how children's brains work, how to reach them when others give up, especially kids like Lily." Graves took a step closer, his voice low. "You don't belong here, and you know nothing about Lily's condition." Caleb's eyes sharpened, and for the first time Graves saw something fierce in them, something that made him step back. "I know you misdiagnosed her 3 years ago," Caleb said quietly. "And I know you're too afraid to admit it." The words struck like a blow. Graves felt heat rise in his face, but his voice faltered. You, you don't know anything. I know she doesn't have severe cerebral palsy, Caleb pressed. I know she has a treatable condition. And I know every day you hide it, she loses time she can never get back. The wind cut between them, but Graves could feel the weight of Nurse Margaret's stare. Caleb's voice was soft, but it carried the certainty of someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. By the following afternoon, whispers about the boy at the hospital steps had begun circulating among staff. Most dismissed him as a curiosity, but one doctor listened more closely. Dr. Hannah Kim, a recent arrival from New York with a reputation for unconventional thinking, had heard Margaret's account in the break room. He said his grandmother was Grace Rivers? She asked, her voice tightening with interest. The Grace Rivers? Margaret nodded. And if you'd heard him talk, it's like the woman is still speaking through him. That was enough for Hannah. She found Caleb exactly where everyone said he'd be, on the stone steps, legs tucked up against the cold, watching the steady stream of patients and visitors pass through the glass doors. Unlike Graves, she didn't approach him from above. She sat down beside him, the chill from the steps biting into her legs. You must be Caleb, she said. He studied her cautiously. Who wants to know? Dr. Hannah Kim. I didn't know your grandmother personally, but everyone knew her work. She saved children other doctors had given up on. Caleb's expression softened just slightly. She taught me that sometimes doctors forget to see the child beyond the diagnosis. And you think that's what's happening to Lily Monroe? Hannah asked. Caleb didn't answer immediately. He looked toward the therapy windows, his gaze lingering there as if he could see Lily inside. I don't think, he said finally. I know. Convince me, Hannah said. Her tone was steady, not mocking. Caleb's reply came without hesitation. Lily doesn't have severe cerebral palsy. She has neuromotor disconnection syndrome. It's rare, but treatable with the right kind of stimulation. I've been watching her reactions. She responds to stimuli no CP patient would. Hannah's pulse quickened. If he was right, Lily had been trapped in the wrong treatment for years. How do you know all this? Caleb's gaze didn't waver. Because my cousin had it, and because my grandmother showed me exactly how to help. The conviction in his voice was disarming, the kind of certainty no textbook could give. Hannah knew she was treading into dangerous waters, but she also knew brilliance sometimes wore unexpected faces. She stood and extended a hand. Come inside with me. We'll talk to Dr. Monroe. Before Caleb could respond, a shadow fell over them. Absolutely not. Dr. Leonard Graves stood in the doorway, his face dark with fury. Dr. Kim, what are you doing? Speaking with someone who might have valuable insight into a patient's condition? She replied evenly. He's a child, Graves shot back. A street kid who's disrupting hospital protocol. He's also the grandson of one of the most respected pediatric neurology nurses this hospital has ever seen, Hannah countered. Graves's nostrils flared. Caleb rose to his feet slowly, his calm a sharp contrast to Graves's seething energy. You're afraid of what I'm going to tell Dr. Monroe, aren't you? Graves's lips curled. I'm not afraid of anything you have to say. Then let me show him, Caleb said simply. If I'm wrong, I'll leave and never come back. Hannah crossed her arms. He's offering to prove it, Leonard. If he's wrong, your position only gets stronger. Graves' eyes darted between them. Refusal would look suspicious. Agreement could expose him. Finally, he straightened his shoulders. Fine, but when this farce collapses, I want it ended permanently. Caleb's mouth curved into the faintest of smiles. Perfect, he said. I think you'll be very surprised. The walk down the corridor to the pediatric neuro ward was heavy with unspoken tension. Dr. Leonard Graves kept adjusting his glasses every few steps, his jaw clenched tight, as if each footfall brought him closer to a precipice he didn't want to face. Dr. Hannah Kim walked beside Caleb, her stride purposeful, the faintest spark of curiosity glimmering in her eyes. Caleb moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had already played this moment out in his head 100 times. In the therapy room, Lily Monroe sat in her wheelchair, small hands folded in her lap, her gaze drifting toward the window as if she could still feel the boy's presence from days before. When her eyes landed on Caleb, they lit up instantly, a smile breaking across her face that made her father, Dr. Daniel Monroe, pause mid-conversation. "What's he doing here?" Daniel asked, looking from Hannah to Graves with a mixture of confusion and guarded hope. "He believes he can show us something about Lily's condition," Hannah replied carefully. "It will only take a few minutes." Graves stepped forward quickly. "Daniel, this is a waste of time. We're indulging a child's fantasy. If it's nothing, we'll know soon enough," Hannah cut in, her tone leaving no room for debate. Caleb approached Lily and knelt down so they were eye to eye. "Hi, Princess," he said softly. "Want to try something new?" Lily nodded almost imperceptibly. Caleb began by lightly tapping points along her legs, just above the knees, then down toward her ankles, watching her face and the subtle twitches in her muscles. "Lift your toes for me," he murmured. To everyone's astonishment, her toes flexed. "Now push your heel down," she obeyed, slow but deliberate. Graves's voice came sharp and defensive. "Those are involuntary spasms." "No," Caleb said firmly without looking up. "Those are controlled responses." He reached into his worn backpack and pulled out a weathered notebook, its pages thick with handwritten notes, dates, and sketches of muscle groups. "For the past 3 weeks," Caleb began, "I've been watching her from the sidewalk. November 1st, she responded to tactile stimulation on her lower extremities. November 5th, she showed conscious facial muscle control when encouraged. November 10th, she attempted to vocalize words when given visual prompts." Daniel Monroe's eyes narrowed as he scanned the pages Caleb held open. Each entry was meticulous, every observation specific and recorded like a seasoned clinician. "Where did you get these MRI results?" Daniel asked, his voice low. Caleb's gaze flickered toward Graves. "My grandmother kept copies of important tests when she worked here. She had Lily's scans from March 2020. He flipped to a page where the report was transcribed in neat handwriting. "Fundamentally normal brain structures. Findings consistent with mild to moderate neuromotor disconnection syndrome. Prognosis favorable with appropriate stimulation." Daniel's grip on the notebook tightened. "Leonard, is this true?" Graves's skin had gone pale. "At the time, there was uncertainty." "Uncertainty?" Daniel's voice cracked, his eyes burning with anger. "You told me my daughter would never walk. You told me to accept that she would be dependent for the rest of her life." Caleb rose to his feet, holding Daniel's gaze. "He didn't tell you because it would mean admitting a mistake that's cost Lily 3 years of her life." Hannah stepped closer to Lily, her eyes scanning the girl's movements with growing fascination. "Daniel, these responses are significant. This isn't wishful thinking. There's preserved motor function here." Caleb knelt beside Lily again. "Princess, want to try standing?" With her small hands gripping his forearms, she pushed herself upright, shaky but determined. Her legs bearing weight for a full 2 seconds before she collapsed back into her chair, giggling with surprise. The room was silent except for her laughter. Daniel's eyes shimmered with tears. 3 years, Leonard," he whispered. 3 years she could have been walking." Graves's mouth opened, but no words came. Caleb quietly closed the notebook and slid it back into his backpack. "With the right treatment, she can run, dance, and play like any other child," he said. "It's not too late. If you have the courage to start now." The sound of Lily's laughter still hung in the air when Daniel Monroe turned toward Leonard Graves, his expression a storm barely contained. "You knew," Daniel said, his voice low but trembling with rage. "You had this information for 3 years, and you did nothing." Graves's shoulders stiffened, but his eyes darted away. "Daniel, I was protecting her from false hope. That boy's observations are unverified. His methods just got my daughter to stand for the first time in her life." Daniel snapped, his voice rising. "Do you have any idea what that means?" Hannah Kim stepped forward, her tone calm but edged with steel. "Leonard, I've reviewed his notes. They're precise, consistent, and scientifically sound. This isn't guesswork. It's pattern recognition and applied neurological stimulation." Graves scoffed, but the sound was hollow. "We cannot take the word of an untrained child. We can when that child has documented proof and the results to back it up, Hannah cut in. Caleb stood quietly, watching the adults clash, his hands resting lightly on the straps of his backpack. There was no gloating in his expression, only the steady focus of someone who knew the truth would speak for itself. Daniel took a step closer to Graves, closing the space between them. I trusted you. I handed over my daughter's future to you, and you let your pride destroy years we can't get back. It wasn't pride, Graves protested, his voice cracking. It was fear, Caleb said suddenly, the single word slicing into the room like a blade. All eyes turned to him. You were afraid to admit you were wrong, afraid of losing your reputation. So you let her stay in that chair rather than face the truth. Graves's face flushed crimson, but he said nothing. Hannah folded her arms. Leonard, the ethical breach here is staggering. This goes beyond a single misdiagnosis. If you've hidden results, if you've altered records, I did what I had to do. Graves snapped, but his voice lacked conviction. Daniel's voice hardened. You're finished here. Effective immediately. Graves blinked. You can't. I can, Daniel interrupted, his authority as chief surgeon leaving no room for doubt. And I will. I'll also be filing a full report to the medical board. They'll want to know how many other children have suffered because of you. Graves' hands curled into fists at his sides. You're going to believe him over me? A boy from the street? I'm going to believe the evidence in that notebook, Daniel said coldly, and the fact that my daughter just took her first step because of him. Silence fell, broken only by the faint hum of the hospital's heating system. Caleb stepped forward, his voice quiet but firm. Dr. Monroe, I can help you build a treatment plan. My grandmother taught me everything she knew about cases like Lily's. We can start today. Daniel looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. You'll work under Dr. Kim's supervision. But yes, let's start. Hannah placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder. Welcome to the team, Caleb. Graves looked from one face to another, realizing the tide had turned completely. The authority he had wielded for years had slipped from his grasp, replaced by a hollow pit in his chest. You're making a mistake, he said weakly. No, Daniel replied, his voice final. The mistake was trusting you. Security arrived a moment later to escort Graves out. As he passed Caleb, the boy met his gaze steadily. There was no malice there, only a quiet, unshakable resolve. It was a look Graves knew would haunt him long after he left these halls. When the door closed behind him, Hannah turned to Caleb. Let's get to work. We have a little girl's future to rewrite. Caleb glanced at Lily, who was still beaming, her fingers drumming impatiently against the armrest. Ready, princess? She nodded eagerly, and in that instant, the room felt lighter, as if the very walls understood that something extraordinary had just begun. 6 months later, the halls of St. Augustine Hospital looked and sounded different. Where the echo of wheelchairs had once filled the corridors, the rhythmic patter of small feet now raced past. The transformation was most visible in the new wing. Its sign read in bold, elegant letters, Grace Rivers Center for Pediatric Neurorehabilitation. Inside, bright murals lined the walls. Laughter mingled with music from therapy sessions, and hope seemed to hum in the air. In one corner of the main therapy room, Lily Monroe darted between foam obstacles, her dark hair flying, a wide smile on her face as she turned to see if Caleb was watching. Faster, she called, her voice ringing with joy. Caleb, now in clean hospital scrubs that still hung a little loose on his thin frame, grinned and timed her run with a small stopwatch. 2 seconds faster than yesterday, he announced, earning an excited cheer from Lily. Dr. Hannah Kim entered with a clipboard in hand, pausing to watch the scene. I'm still not sure which of you is the bigger miracle, she said warmly. Caleb shrugged. She did the work. I just showed her where to start. Since the day Graves was removed, Caleb had been living with the Monroe family, officially adopted after weeks of paperwork. He had his own room now, books piled on the desk, a framed photo of Grace Rivers above the bed. But most mornings, he was in the center before sunrise, reviewing patient notes with Hannah and shadowing Daniel Monroe in therapy evaluations. News of Lily's recovery had spread far beyond Chicago. Families drove hundreds of miles, sometimes from other states, to seek treatment at the new center. In the past month alone, they had accepted 15 new patients, many of them children labeled as hopeless cases elsewhere. Caleb approached each child with the same calm focus he had shown with Lily, adapting Grace's techniques to individual needs. Some responded immediately, others slowly, but all began to change. One afternoon, as Caleb was helping a young boy named Miguel attempt his first supported steps, Daniel pulled him aside. "Do you understand what you've started here?" he asked. Caleb shook his head. "I'm just doing what my grandmother taught me." "No," Daniel said, his voice firm. "You're doing more. You're giving families back their futures." That evening, as they locked up the center, Caleb paused to look back through the glass doors. The therapy mats, the small chairs, the colorful drawings pinned to the walls. It was nothing like the sterile hospital room where he'd first met Lily. This place breathed life, but the work was relentless. For every success, there were setbacks, tears, days when progress felt impossible. Hannah reminded him often, "Miracles take time, Caleb. Even the fastest storms build slowly before they break." And Caleb understood. Grace had always told him that healing wasn't about speed. It was about connection. Still, there were moments when he couldn't help but feel the weight of what they were building. One rainy afternoon, a mother arrived carrying her daughter, the child's limbs stiff and unresponsive. As Caleb knelt to greet her, the mother's eyes brimmed with quiet desperation. "They told me nothing could be done," she whispered. Caleb smiled gently. "They said the same about Lily." By the end of the session, the little girl's fingers had curled around his hand, tiny movements, but enough to ignite the spark of hope. Outside the therapy rooms, Daniel was pushing for national recognition, working with other hospitals to replicate the center's methods. He knew the battle wouldn't be easy. Traditional medicine resisted change, but Lily's story was undeniable proof. As for Graves, word drifted back that he had taken a job selling medical equipment, far from the prestige he once enjoyed. Caleb didn't dwell on him. The boy who had once been chased from these halls had no time for grudges. There were too many children waiting. Late one night, Caleb stood in the quiet therapy room, the hum of the city outside. He touched the plaque by the door that bore his grandmother's name. "We're just getting started, Grace," he murmured, and somewhere in the stillness, he felt as if she was smiling back. 3 years later, the Grace Rivers Center had become a national leader in pediatric neurorehabilitation. The once modest wing now stretched across 2 floors, filled with light, laughter, and the determined voices of children pushing past their limits. Caleb Rivers, now 14, balanced his life between an accelerated medical studies program for gifted students and his work at the center. Though he wore a white trainee's coat and carried a tablet instead of a battered notebook, the same calm fire still burned in his eyes. Across the room, Lily Monroe, now 11, was helping a younger patient take her first steps along the parallel bars. Her encouragement was as warm and steady as the boy who had once knelt before her in a crowded hospital lobby. She turned to catch Caleb watching and flashed him a grin. "Your turn to be impressed," she teased. Caleb laughed. "Always." Dr. Hannah Kim and Dr. Daniel Monroe often joked that they had adopted not just a son, but a colleague whose instincts rivaled seasoned physicians. Together they had treated hundreds of children, rewriting stories that once ended in despair. Yet the heart of their work was never about the numbers. It was about moments, the first wobbly step, the first word after years of silence, the tearful embrace of a parent who had almost stopped believing. On the wall near the entrance, a plaque bore Grace Rivers' words, "Every miracle begins when someone refuses to give up on a child." Visitors stopped to read it, often with wet eyes before stepping inside. Caleb would sometimes pause there too, not out of habit, but to remind himself why he had fought so hard to stay. Dr. Graves's name was never mentioned in these halls. His shadow had long since faded, replaced by something brighter, something enduring. On a quiet evening, Caleb and Lily sat side by side in the empty therapy room, their reflections in the glass merged with the lights of the city. "You know," Lily said softly, "you didn't just teach me to walk, you taught me to believe." Caleb smiled. "You taught me the same thing." CTA, have you ever turned someone's doubt into your greatest motivation? Share your story of proving the impossible in the comments.